Let me start over. Hello, everyone, and thank you for joining us for our History Happy Hour Costume Balls Through the Ages. We are thrilled to be able to share the story with you tonight. My name is John Kennedy, and I am the Specialist of Education and Engagement at the Indiana Historical Society. It is great to have so many of you here this evening. I will be going over a few logistics before passing the mic over to our speakers. At Indiana Historical Society, we are Indiana's storyteller, connecting people to the past. We collect paper-based items such as books, paintings, letters, photographs, diaries, and more to tell Indiana's unique stories. We then find ways to share these stories through publications, exhibits, and events such as these. Through these documents, we tell the diverse stories of Indiana and inspire a future grounded in our state's uniting values and principles. Tonight, we're here for a conversation regarding costume balls through the ages with our guest, Karen DePaul. Besides being our manager at Local History Services here at Indiana Historical Society, Karen works with small museums and heritage organizations throughout the state. She earned a BA in history and an MS in historic costumes and textile conservation, knowledge she has drawn upon for 2 publications, the Karen Display of Historic Clothing, Rowman and Littlefield Publishers, and the House of Worth, fashion sketches from 1916 to 1918 from Dover Publications. Karen currently serves as a board member of the Association of Indiana Museums and is Vice President of External Relations for the Costume Society of America, and is a member of the American Association for State and Local History Field Services Alliance. Thank you for being here, Karen.
Yeah, thanks so much, John.
And helping guide us through our discussion is our moderator, Marissa Purcell. Marissa is our education coordinator here at Indiana Historical Society and is our state affiliate for National History Day. Hello, Marissa.
Hello.
Before I hand it over to our guests, I have a few more pieces of logistics to cover. For this event, I will talk for about 35 minutes and then we'll open it up to your questions. If you have questions as we go along, please drop it in the Q&A section at the bottom of your Zoom screen. We'll keep an eye on them and then pepper them in as we get to the second half of the program. If you'd like to add anything into the chat box, don't forget to change your response to everyone so that we can all see your thoughts. Keep an eye on the chat where I will be dropping in links and URLs throughout the conversation. Don't worry if you miss one, they will be delivered to your inbox in a follow-up email tomorrow morning. This program is being recorded, and you can catch the replay on our website, indianahistory.org, in the upcoming weeks. And if you enjoyed this program, please consider coming back for more. Our History Happy Hours continue next month on November 17th with a look at Hoosier Latinos, an upcoming book detailing the lives and contributions of Latinos in the state of Indiana, with the book's authors Nicole Martinez-Legrand and Daniel Gonzalez. And then on December 8th, we will take a look back at America's Store, the history of Ellis Ayres, with Ken Turchi, author of Ellis Ayres and Company, The Store at the Crossroads of America. You can sign up for these events in person and in virtual events at www.indianahistory.org/visit/calendar. All right, take it away, Marissa.
All right, Karen.
So thank you guys so much for having me. This is going to be fun. So I do want to just kind of start out by saying that tonight we're going to focus on fancy dress balls of the United States, Canada, and Europe. There are traditions of costume celebrations throughout various cultures, but these are the ones that I'm qualified to speak on. So I just wanted to let everybody know that this is not an all-encompassing look at all kinds of costumed festivities, just those that kind of happened in these areas. So additionally, I also wanted to say that the topic of fancy dress balls has a lot of possible directions that we could go. But tonight we're going to talk about the fun side and we're going to focus in on the costumes. But in that respect, I do want to recognize kind of off the bat that there are some aspects of fancy dress balls in the Western world that were inherently problematic celebrations of colonialism. So having that discussion about fancy dress balls deserves an entire hour of its own or more. So I just wanted to say that while it's important, I am not prepared to do that part of the topic justice tonight. So we're not ignoring it, but it's just something that we're going to not really spend time on here. But I did want to let everyone know that that is a recognized issue with some of these celebrations.
Thank you. So to get us started off, I have the first question for you. So what were fancy dress balls?
That's a great question, Marissa. And obviously one we should answer at the beginning. Otherwise, people are going to be very confused as we move along.
Oh, yes.
So fancy dress balls were kind of an opportunity for people to dress up and celebrate. Mostly now we tend to associate them with things like Halloween or Mardi Gras, but they actually used to be held all year long, and they would be held for any kind of celebration, from New Year's Eve to Washington's birthday, to just because you wanted to have a ball and you thought it would be fun to have a theme.
Okay. So how far back do these parties go?
So fancy dress balls really kind of grew out of this idea of masquerades from like as far back as the 1600s. So masquerades though started to get kind of by the early 1800s, they had started to get this connotation and this reputation as these debaucherous affairs, because you would come as, kind of the title notes, as a masquerade character. So your face would be covered. The whole idea was that no one knew who you were, but it ended up then being that if no one knew who you were, then you were at liberty to do whatever you wanted. And so they kind of started to get this horrible reputation of kind of being things that maybe polite society should not be taking part in.
I see.
So, yeah. So, I mean, they sound like a bunch of fun, but but understandably kind of not really where things are going. So in the 1800s, the fancy dress ball kind of concept really recaptured that idea of costume parties being fun and coming as, instead of kind of coming in a costume that made your personality or made yourself kind of disappear into the crowd, the idea for fancy dress balls was much more about like coming as something that spoke to you or spoke about something you found interesting or someone that you found interesting. And so it was much more about kind of representing yourself with your costume instead of using your costume as a disguise.
Oh, I see the difference. So hiding beside versus putting forth. I gotcha.
Yep, exactly.
So were these fancy dress parties the only time people dressed up?
No. So people, it's really kind of fascinating because now we don't do a lot of just kind of general dressing up outside of Halloween or maybe Mardi Gras or the occasional costume party that someone might throw. But again, those usually are happening in October. But in the 19th and early 20th centuries, there were actually a lot of opportunities to dress up. So kind of prior to the Great Depression, there were a lot of opportunities to dress up for adults. Now it's a lot confined more to children, but people would dress up for things like to work booths at fairs, like the Civil War sanitary fairs. They would have a booth that was maybe the booth that was themed nighttime. And then everyone would come dressed who was working the booth as stars or the moon or planets or whatever. They would also, it was really popular to host like themed fundraisers that had a costume element, or just, like I said, general parties that celebrated things like Washington's birthday or like a Valentine's Day party. Now, usually you go to a Valentine's Day party and you might wear red and pink and white, or you might wear a cocktail dress, but people would literally come like dressed up as hearts and dressed up as Saint Valentine and things like that. There were even just things like parlor amusements is kind of what they were classified as, that were just like small gatherings, like, hey, I'm having my sister's family over for Friday night dinner. Let's do it colonial themed, like, and everyone would come dressed up. So just these kind of little opportunities. It was a part of the culture in a way that it is not anymore, which is too bad.
Yeah, it is too bad, because I was thinking like if you had like a board game night, somebody could come dressed up as like checkers or chess or something like that. So.
That would be awesome. You should host that and invite me.
Yes. So who participated in these types of events, particularly the fancy dress parties?
In reality, it was everyone. So the truth was that like fancy dress balls kind of became this type of party that everyone was participating in. So there were a lot of fancy dress balls that were hosted by society's elite throughout the US, Canada, and England. But just like with everything else, the middle class kind of saw these happening, thought they looked like a lot of fun, and did their own versions of them. So they kind of did their own versions of the events. There were also kind of two different types of fancy dress parties. There were the fancy dress balls that were like invitation based. And then there were fancy dress parties or balls that were put on as fundraisers, where as long as you bought a ticket, you were welcome to come.
Okay.
So it also wasn't just adults, which I thought was kind of interesting, is that there were even like fancy dress balls, like super fancy, not like 1920s Halloween, come in the costume you made from a paper bag, but like super fancy for elite children. And so like even the kids were participating in these just like adult events, and around the same kind of things like holidays and birthday parties and anything like that. So really up until about World War I, these kind of costume parties were for adults and children of all different economic statuses. Basically, if you could get the invitation or afford the ticket, you were good to go, or host one yourself.
Okay. So tell us a little more about these high society fancy dress balls. I'm very interested in these.
These are a lot of fun. So one of the first kind of fancy dress balls that we really hear a lot about in the 19th century, that kind of really sets off the tone of the idea of these coming back as less the masquerade and more moving into this fancy dress category, is a ball that was hosted in 1842 by Queen Victoria and Prince Albert. So sometimes the hostesses or hosts of the fancy dress balls would declare a theme, and then everyone was encouraged to participate in the theme. For this ball in 1842, the theme at Buckingham Palace was medieval. So it was kind of like their version of historically accurate. It's really interesting because you look at some of the images from this ball and some of like the sketches and the comments, and they still followed the fashionable silhouette, but then kind of tweaked it to medieval. So the Queen became, sorry, flipped too fast. The Queen came as Queen Consort Philippa of Hainault, and then Prince Albert came as King Edward III, and they had these very elaborate kind of costumes made. And it was really kind of interesting because they touted it as kind of providing business to the Spitalfield silk factories in England and the local tradespeople who were suffering from the English economy at the time. And this concept of lavish parties providing jobs for these kinds of areas in the areas and the cities they were hosted in becomes kind of a trope that is used as this like, oh, but we're having this fancy party and it's totally unnecessary. But you know what? Because we're having it, all these people are getting hired to do these things that they would not be needing to do otherwise. And it's really interesting because in the newspapers, even at the time, they're like, but really, is it? Like, is this opportunity for extravagance really like
Necessary
of an economic thing? Yeah. So Queen Victoria and Prince Albert had one in England. And then this is a picture of a woman who came as the Dominion of Canada to a party in 1876 that was hosted by the Earl of Dufferin in Ottawa, Canada. And it's kind of interesting because at this point, they start to have, like, you would hire photographers, kind of like, think about it like when you would go to your high school prom and there's a photographer there with his booth set up and you would stop by and get your picture taken and then you could buy your prom picture. Well, some of these balls were kind of like that, and people would hire photographers to set up and take pictures of everyone who came to the ball. And so we have these great records of some of these super high class balls and super fancy balls that really go into like what everyone was wearing. So this one is 1883. The photographer Mora was hired to take photographs of the decked out attendees at Mrs. Alva Vanderbilt's fancy dress ball in New York City, which was a huge deal. It was considered kind of the Vanderbilts entrance into old New York society. If you've watched, oh no, I'm totally forgetting. There was a series on either Netflix or Hulu that was all about the Gilded Age. If you've watched the Gilded Age, they talk about this party. I think in the Gilded Age, they don't necessarily do it as a fancy dress ball. I don't remember if they do or not, but they talk about this party that the Vanderbilts throw in the 1880s, which is kind of cool.
That is cool. I really like that costume. It's
I
very
know, right? The Hornet, she's amusing. This one though, this is one of my favorites and is one of kind of the best known costumes. It was worn by Mrs. Vanderbilt's sister-in-law, Alice, and she had this dress made. So the dress is on the right. It's at the collection of the Museum of the City of New York, and then the photograph of her wearing it is on the left. And she came as Electric Light. So a very kind of on topic kind of thing that she came as, and she had this beautiful, gorgeous dress made in Paris at a couture house, so not cheap. And the costume actually was laced with batteries so that she could literally light up like an electric light.
Oh, wow.
So yeah, so she would like light up and glow, which was kind of cool. And the newspapers apparently reported that I think in April of 1883, I think the party was in May, they reported that $5 million worth of precious stones, silks, velvets, laces, etc. were worn by the attendants of Mrs. Vanderbilt's fancy dress ball in New York City.
Oh, wow.
And that is that's a lot of money for 2022.
I was
let
gonna
alone
say,
1883. Like that's a lot of money for a party. So you can kind of see why they were like, this is great for the economy. And everybody else is like,
maybe not.
Yep. And then the last one of the other kind of famous fancy dress balls that was captured in this way is in July of 1897. There was a photographer who then ended up publishing a book of the revelers at the Devonshire House fancy dress ball that was held for Queen Victoria's Diamond Jubilee. And so this was a published book that anybody could purchase. Some of them created just like at a prom, like you could buy your own picture or the photographer might put together a book, but this was like a published book that you could go to the store and buy that had all these highfalutin English people. And in this one, you can see on the left and right is Consuelo Vanderbilt, so one of the American dollar princesses. So an American who's attending one of these parties with her husband, Charles Spencer Churchill, who was the 9th Duke of Marlborough. So they came as like French, I think it's French aristocrats. So yeah, so they had these like gorgeous dresses, and it's just full of like 600 pictures of the people who attended this crazy ball.
Wow. That's really amazing.
Yeah, it's very cool. It made it very hard to choose photos for
I'm sure.
this.
Oh, wow. Just thinking about like the bee costume and then the quilted one and then these, just wow. So that leads me into my next question though, now that I've seen several of the costumes. What kind of costumes were popular?
So they did like anything was on the table. It's really kind of interesting because now we tend towards more the like dressing up as professions or dressing up as like scary, spooky things. That was not really where these balls went. In part, they didn't go to the spookiness because it wasn't always about Halloween. But there was a lot of gentlemen, especially, kind of took hold of characters that allowed them to like dress up as gallant heroes or kings or famous historical figures. And while women also kind of would dress up as famous figures, they also were equally likely to dress up as really absurd concepts. So like this picture here from the 1860s on the left is a woman dressed as photography.
Oh.
So it's like this random concept that you would dress up as, or like the Hornet, like coming as something like that, or Electric Light. Like there's no, it's super conceptual, as opposed to like, I came as King Edward III. Like that's a very, like, I can look up a historical images from that period and find something or make something that looks like that, versus the creativity that you really have to get to figure out, like, how do you dress up as photography?
Yes, I was actually while you're talking looking at her costume, and now that I look closer, you can actually like see the photographs along her dress. That's really cool.
Yeah, it is
Cool.
very neat.
So where would they get these costumes? Did they buy them? Did they make them both? How did they get them?
Yeah, a little bit of everything. So the options for costumes then were very similar to kind of how we would get costumes now. Like you might rent them, you could buy them from the store, you could just look at images and get inspiration and then make them yourself. One of the places though that you could do this, where you don't really see people doing this now, is going to kind of haute couture houses in Paris. So like high fashion houses that were used to making like these brilliant ball gowns and everyday clothing for queens and lords and ladies and the super rich. We're also making these costumes because costume and fancy dress balls were so popular that there was money to be made from them. So one of my favorite couture houses of all time is the House of Worth. And they made the Electric Light costume for Alice Vanderbilt.
Okay.
But they also, like, there's all these sketches that exist at the Victoria and Albert Museum of other sketches that they did of fancy dress costumes that they could make. And it also kind of shows the range of kind of where like these abstract things. So like you could go as a peacock or as the alphabet with all the alphabet at the bottom, or Eve and the serpent. This one I also really love here on the left, the flower basket. Like just put on a dress that has a very like a silhouette, very in keeping with the 1860s and 70s, but put a little basket style decoration on top and flowers on it, and there you go. Or you could go as a rainbow or the Queen of Clubs. And so they just, I don't know, like there were just some really fun, clever things. But yeah, so you could go to one of these couture houses, and the House of Worth actually in this period from like 1860 to 1900 was really known for their fancy dress costumes, and like really known as being one of the places. Like there was a reason that Alice Vanderbilt went to the House of Worth for this huge party, because she knew that she would make a statement.
Okay, they seem very unique.
Yes, yeah, like it almost makes you wonder. And I mean, at a couture house like the House of Worth, they would keep track of like who ordered what design for what party, so that they wouldn't dress someone, again, kind of like you see with prom shops now, like especially in small communities, where the prom shop will make notes of like who's ordered what dress, so that they don't sell the same dress to someone also going to that same party. So yeah, they were very unique creations.
Wasn't that a thing where it was like you don't want to be caught wearing the same dress or something?
Oh yeah, like you didn't even necessarily want to be caught wearing the same dress to another party that you were going to. So that's a whole, the couture industry in Paris at this time was absolutely fascinating, and I love it. And as John said, I wrote a book about part of it. So a super fascinating topic that I could talk your ear off for another hour, but but yeah, like you could also like, okay, that's very specific part of society. Like these are the people going to those fancy costume balls that we talked about, not necessarily like the middle class people going to a costume ball that they bought $1 ticket for as a fundraiser. So there were options available to them too. Like you could rent costumes, you could buy Lady Van Horn, who's pictured here. This costume that she wore to the Earl of Dufferin's ball in 1876 was actually purchased from a department store. I think it's 1898. I think it's in the tag in it is Lord and Taylor. So like obviously that's coming from, at this time, that's coming from their dress shop. Like it's still being made for her, but not by this couture house. It's being made for her at the department store. This isn't quite, we're not quite to like out of the box, buy it in a plastic bag and take it home and wear it once kind of costumes. But it is kind of crazy though, because like even renting costumes, which now we think of as like a nice cheap way to do something for a one night thing, is like in 1876, it costs between $5 and $20 to rent a costume, depending on how fancy it was, which for inflation calculates to between $130 and $550, like for a rental. And then if you wanted to buy it, like the other thing is that in 1876, the Earl of Dufferin was like, we want to keep our ball economical. So they suggested that you spend no more, like that you spend between $30 and $100, which was like $800 to $2,800. Like,
oh wow,
$2,800 is more than I spent on my wedding dress that I was going to wear on one day. Like it's almost what I spent on the wedding. Like that's still a lot of money.
Yes.
Which is crazy.
Yes. So that's definitely a lot of money for one party.
Yeah. So if you were like middle class, so one of the cool things too was that because there were all these people taking photographs of kind of these fancy dress balls, they were making them into books, and they started publishing these books, not just of the photographs like the one ball that we discussed, but like making books of like inspiration. So you could get one of these books or go to a department store and look through one of these books and then kind of go off and make the costume yourself or get inspired by it and make something similar from things that either like you already had at home or different elements that you might purchase. Like you might need a pair of black tights to be Rosalind, but because you didn't have them at home, but maybe you have like an old dress that you could cut off or a cape that you could wear and maybe just purchase a hat. Like there were different ways of doing things. Some publications were even put out by department stores, like this one that was done by Debenham and Freebody in London, which is just suggestions of fancy dress ball costumes, and they described them and they gave pictures of them. And then you could, even if you weren't a skilled seamstress enough to say, like to look at a picture and be inspired to make something similar, you could even order like a paper pattern of the costume and make it yourself at home that way, which was pretty cool. And then one of the other things that these books would do too for the middle class was they offered kind of advice on choosing costumes too, because these were filled with like hundreds of costume ideas. So this was one of my favorite bits of advice, was that in 1906, this suggestion of selecting something that is individually becoming and in harmony with one's personality, because certain costumes might suit features and builds of one group when they don't another. There was another one that suggested like Joan of Arc was a strong, solid woman, like that's part of the persona. So having a slight like 17-year-old come as Joan of Arc might not make any sense. Well, at the same time, having a like stout 50-year-old woman come as Folly or as the Fairy Queen might also not work. Like if you're known for, I don't know, for being a little bit snarky or sassy, like maybe coming as the Fairy Queen doesn't make much sense. So they always kind of put that out there of like, hey guys, be something fitting to you. But yeah, they really just, these books were just filled with images that were really just meant to inspire people. And sometimes they were really specific. Like you could go as America and wear red, white, and blue. You could go as like an English peasant girl, like these kind of random things. And like I said, like we talked about before, sometimes they were these broad concepts. Like the middle picture is classic. Like that's literally what she is. She's like a melding of all ancient Greek and ancient Roman, and like she's just classic.
Interesting.
Yeah.
That was one of the costumes.
Yeah. And then my favorite is the one on the left from the 1890s, which is you could go as a waste paper basket. Like just glue some trash on yourself. It's like that concept a couple years ago of like wrapping yourself in tinfoil and going as a leftover. Like that is not new.
That's interesting though.
Right? Like you think these people as being like, especially they're inspired by these grand dress balls and people are coming as trash receptacles. Like that's
Not much
it
has changed.
doesn't seem to
has it?
fit. But it's great. But you also had, you know, there were various editions of all of these books, and you did have things like witches. They weren't necessarily only for Halloween costume balls though. They were for any time of year. There were books that this gentleman, Arden Holt, did kind of two different books rather, a bunch of different editions of Fancy Dresses Described, which was published throughout the 1880s and 1890s. And then he also did one for gentlemen specifically. And then at the end, at the back of the women's edition, were also like the costumes you see here for kids. So they eventually got their own books from other people, but for the most part, they were stuck in the back.
Okay.
And then these ones I really loved too, that like it was also not uncommon for people to come, which we see now too, like people to come dressed as groupings. So like on the right hand side, this magazine suggested like, hey, you and your friends could come as a group where one of you is paint and one of you is a canvas. And then the middle woman is a paintbrush. I don't know how she got her hair like that. And I would love to see if someone actually managed to do this costume.
Yes.
But like, yeah, next time you go to a costume party, just come as a paintbrush. And
Yeah,
it'd
that's
be
really
great.
cool.
It is really cool. I'm kind of like, how can I do that for the costume party I have to go to this year? Like, can we make this happen?
Yes. So were there any fancy dress balls here in Indiana?
There were. There weren't a ton. But they are mentioned. So not only are kind of the newspapers and the journals of the day kind of picking up reports from Paris or London when some of these balls are getting held, but they're also picking up obviously from things happening here. So like in Evansville in 1857, so really early for a fancy dress ball, but it's noted that there was one. And it even notes that the Harmony Band was going to play. So this was kind of a report of an advertised dress ball that it's going to be happening on Friday night. So this is probably one where someone could have bought a ticket and gone, as opposed to later on the Evansville Daily News in 1869 does this report of a fancy dress ball at West Baden Springs. And it talks about some of the people who were present and it notes some of their costumes. So Mrs. Welborough came as the Sister of Charity, and Mrs. Wellborn came as a Spanish princess. Or this was my favorite. Mrs. Van Ripper came as a snowflake. Oh,
That is interesting.
yeah. So these are happening, and like there's, in 1911, Indianapolis notes that that these fancy dress balls are happening. There's also a couple of different times in the Indianapolis news where they note that Indianapolis is not known for hosting fancy dress balls, which I thought was kind of interesting, that they, in the midst of reporting on all of these ones that are happening elsewhere, they're kind of like, hey, don't yell at us for not reporting on what's happening in Indianapolis, because it's not really our thing. We don't really do that. So, and I don't know, honestly, I didn't have the opportunity to really kind of dig into that. I don't know if they just didn't have the kind of social set that threw them frequently, or at least in the same lavishness that they got thrown in New York, or if it just was something that the area, it was just kind of another way to host balls and fairs and things. So it might just not have been something that our area really went in and did as frequently as places in New York.
Well,
but they were here. They did do them.
Huh. So, how did we get from these fancy dress balls of the 19th and 20th century to where we are now?
That's a great question. So after World War One, kind of the idea of fancy dress balls kind of starts to fade away a little bit. And then, the Great Depression, followed by World War II, really kind of puts the nail in their coffin. Like, people are busy doing other things. But they do kind of, as we know, they do kind of stick around for Mardi Gras or for Halloween, kind of as the main times that you see them. Now, they also at that point, so early on in the 20th century, Halloween itself was much more about kids dressing up as in masquerade costumes, basically, so that you couldn't tell who they were, and then going out and playing tricks. I don't know if any of you has seen Meet Me in St. Louis, the Judy Garland movie, but that's always what I think about when I think of like turn of the century Halloween, is the kids getting together, doing a big bonfire in the middle of the street and just wreaking havoc on their neighborhood, basically. And so it gets to a point though during the Great Depression where it really turns from like tricks and fun to like true vandalism. And so what happens is during the Great Depression then and into World War II, you start to have this real push to focus on children at Halloween and to give them structured activities to do instead. So that's when you start seeing like trick-or-treating happening, or these costume parties for kids at Halloween. It's to basically put them in one place so that you can keep an eye on them on this night that is known for these debaucherous activities. So yeah, which is pretty cool. And so so things kind of, costume balls, kind of like I said, like between the Great Depression and World War II, they just kind of die out. They're kept alive at Halloween and at certain events. And then we also start to see kind of this shift in costumes a little bit. Like by the 1950s, you can now get more like ready to wear costumes, like out of the box. Like, I'm going to go to the store, I'm going to buy a princess costume, I'm going to get home, take it out of the box and be ready for a party like 5 minutes later. In the 70s, you start to see this huge jump in popularity of like horror inspired costumes because of the popularity of like slasher films. So the Halloween mask, Mike Myers mask becomes like the thing. And then you just kind of start to see a lot more emphasis post 1950 on like famous characters. So people coming as like Mickey Mouse, or like very specific characters like that, or TV characters, or superheroes, or movie characters, or things like that. And much, much fewer of the like, I'm going to go as a waste paper basket sort of thing.
So it goes more from like, I'm going to be a concept almost to I'm actually going to be a thing.
Yeah.
Oh.
Yeah, you start to see a lot more of that. So yeah, it kind of, honestly, I mean, like a lot of things, the Great Depression and World War II really, really kind of shifted them.
Okay. Well, thank you. I'm going to go ahead and open it for Q&A now.
Yeah, and I just threw up this picture. I just thought it was a fun one, so I thought it would be a fun one during our Q&A.
Certainly. So the first question is from Nicole. She asks, what is the weirdest, strangest, or most unique costume party theme you have come upon in your studies?
Oh, you know what? I made a note of one of these party themes because I thought it was hilarious. There was a party thrown in the late 19th century in New York that was titled Suppressed Desires, was the theme of the party. Now, if that doesn't scream like we are looking for debauchery, I don't know what does. But yes, that was one of my favorites, was like, it wasn't a time period, it was suppressed desires.
Interesting.
Yeah, there were no pictures of that one, which I was kind of bummed about.
So our next question comes from T. Gumberts, and they ask, did the New York Society compete with one another for top parties?
Yes, so most definitely at this time, like, and in the late 19th century in New York City specifically, there was something called the 400 Club. So there were kind of two groups of people in New York City at the time. There were the old wealthy who had their riches, could trace their lineage and their riches back to England, back to the Pilgrims, all of that. And they were kind of, for lack of a better word, they were kind of ruled by Mr. and Mrs. Astor. And the Astors kind of like, if you couldn't get in with the Astors, then you might as well not even try. So actually what happened, part of the story about this ball in 1883 with the Vanderbilts is that the Vanderbilts were new money. They were like the American dream, the pull yourself up by the bootstraps. The Vanderbilts had only had their money for like one generation at this point. They were seen as like, well, you may have money, but you don't deserve to be in high society. And so Mrs. Astor, who kept this, was famous for keeping this list of like 400 families that were considered New York's elite, was kind of this gatekeeper. And the Vanderbilts, when Mrs. Vanderbilt threw this party, part of the whole point was get Mrs. Astor in the door, because if she accepted you and accepted your invitation to the party, then you were kind of seen as in the in crowd. And you would start getting all these invitations from other people. So you're constantly seeing people vying for invites to parties, for throwing the best parties. Spoiler alert, Mrs. Vanderbilt did get Mrs. Astor to her party by kind of she was manipulative. Like this, I will give Mrs. Vanderbilt, like she was on top of it. She basically withheld a very expected invitation from Mrs. Astor's daughter until Mrs. Astor would pay her a call. And then once she paid her a call, it was kind of like, oh, well, now you've come into my home and looky there, I must be part of this circle. So it did work. She did become part of the upper class, but yeah, they definitely tried to out party each other in so many different realms.
Interesting.
Yeah.
The next couple of questions I'm actually going to kind of combine. Do balls of this sort still continue today? And it sounds similar to the Met Gala. Would that be an equivalent?
So we don't hear as much about balls like this today. They do still happen, like just like everybody there are certain groups and certain people who like to throw costume parties. I would say though that the Met Gala and the costumes that are worn to the Met Gala are very much kind of in keeping with this idea. There was one woman whose name I can't remember because I didn't note it, but at this year's Met Gala, who actually her dress was inspired by the electric light dress that Alice Vanderbilt wore. It was just a gold like sheath dress with a lot of gold fringe, but it was that inspiration. But definitely the Met Gala and the over the top costumes that you see worn to that is probably, you're right, the closest that we kind of come right now in America to having something of this type. And I would say also just generally matching the like how much it's reported on and how much people are inspired by it kind of is also similar.
Okay, how much of a splash it makes in the press, so to speak.
Yes, yeah, yep, for sure. Because yeah, everything else is kind of more like, oh yeah, the best dressed at the Emmys is great, but they're all wearing like legitimate evening clothes. Like there were regular balls all the time too, but the really ones that got really splashy were these like what's Mrs. Astor gonna come as? What's Mrs. Van Horn gonna come as?
Okay.
No.
So the next question we have is, did the food, drink, and entertainment usually match the theme typically? And if so, what would be an example?
You know what? I did not dive too much into kind of the other aspects of the fancy dress balls. I would imagine they did. I mean, there were comments in like, especially for ones like Queen Victoria's ball, where like some of the music, not all of it, but some of it would have been inspired by medieval, probably much like we do now. Like you know, if you're having a themed party, you're probably going to serve food that's of that theme. So I would have expected that there would have been, you know, kind of medieval style food. But yeah, I don't know for sure. I didn't dive too much into that. The food, you know, when you look at like the newspapers and stuff, the food and the music aren't usually reported on in the same way that details about what people are wearing kind of are reported on. So it's a great question. And I will actually have to do some looking because now I'm curious too.
Okay. The next question we have is the motivations for people who attended fancy dress balls seem to complement the reasons people dress in costumes, like Comic-Con and the Indianapolis Gen Con. Do you think society will keep adapting to new eras with new forms of fancy dress occasions?
I think so. I mean, I think it's kind of in some ways human nature to want to take a moment to be somebody that you're not. So I think that that kind of concept of Comic-Con being a different avenue for dressing up than these fancy dress balls were, but still kind of that opportunity to be someone else is great. And yeah, I think that there will always be groups of people who want to kind of dive into this idea of dressing up. And I think things like Comic-Con and Gen Con have definitely in the 21st century kind of pulled us in this direction of having more opportunities for costumes and dressing up than I think we had even, you know, in the 70s or 80s. Like, I think we are coming into a time again where more and more opportunities to dress up are happening. You know, even thinking about things like in the historic fashion community of, you know, women getting together and, you know, men getting together and dressing up as I can't think of what it's called, but there is an event at the Benjamin Harrison House that they used to host pre-pandemic. I don't know if they've started hosting it again. But it was like a croquet tournament and people would come dressed up, or you might dress up and get together with your friends to do like a historic, like 18th century tea or whatever. And like, I think in the same way that some of these costume balls or opportunities for dress up, I should say that, not the costume fancy dress balls, but these other opportunities for dress up that we talked about really kind of came out of these celebrations from America's 100th birthday in 1876. I think we've seen a little bit of that happen too since America's bicentennial. But as we entered the 21st century, I think is where you start to see not just these concepts of like having times to get together and dress up like historical characters, but to dress up as any character. So I think that would be certainly something that would be really interesting to take a look at, like where are we in this ebb and flow of liking to dress up.
Okay. The next question is, did fancy dress balls reflect the current phenomena of influencers where a popular costume from one ball would initiate a trend at later events?
You know what, I'm not sure. I think in a trickle down sort of way, probably, in that, you know, I imagine after Mrs. Vanderbilt got all of this praise for her electric light costume, there were probably more middle class people kind of coming as something in that realm. But at the same time, though, on the high society end, people were wanting to be individual because they wanted to be the next Alice Vanderbilt with her electric light costume. So you wouldn't necessarily see like suddenly all these electric light costumes come out at these big parties because they were wanting to kind of outshine each other. But I think you definitely would see those kinds of things happening as they trickled down, as kind of that got noticed in the newspaper, then you would see more people dressing up as that. I think it's just part of our nature. Like in the realm of influencers, they're trying to always outdo each other. But in the realm of us, those of us who are being influenced, I think we frequently kind of take that and run with it and make it our own, but try to kind of ride the coattails. And I say that as one of those people. I am not in no way, shape, or form have I ever been or will I ever be an influencer. I am definitely an influenced.
I am also an influenced. I think we have time for a couple more questions. So what a question we have is, what kind of behavior was encouraged at fancy dress balls? Were they meant to be more relaxed parties, or were people expected to be on their finest behavior?
So in general, kind of part of the idea was at masquerades that we talked about, they were kind of, you were encouraged, like, this is your time where you're behind a mask, you can do and be whatever you want. Whereas with fancy dress balls, the social constructs were kind of the same. Like, you were still expected to act appropriately, because the thing was is that everyone knew, like, no one believed you were an Electric Light. Everyone still knew you were Alice Vanderbilt. So like, if you did something horrifically misstepping in society, it would have been noted. So it was definitely like, it was a more fun atmosphere in that it wasn't like costume wise, it was more fun and less stuffy, but you still were expected to act appropriately, whatever that appropriately was deemed. But yeah, whereas the masquerades, it was like, cover your face so that no one knows who you are, and then do all the things that you would never do. If anybody ever remembers watching the Kirsten Dunst in Marie Antoinette from, I don't know, it's like early 2000s. But anyways, they do a masquerade, they attend a masquerade on that. And part of the reason why that worked is because no one knew she was Marie Antoinette when she went to this party, because she was entirely covered. She had a mask over her face. And so she could literally do whatever she wanted because no one knew she was the queen.
Oh, sneaky.
So, yep.
Very sneaky. All right, the next question is, and this is a fun one. If you could have attended a costume ball in any of the eras or regions you have mentioned, which would you choose and why?
Oh, that's a good question. So it's kind of a toss-up, because for one, I would have loved to attend / honestly, I would have settled for being a fly on the wall at Mrs. Vanderbilt's party. It was considered like the party of the century in the United States. So there's definitely that on one side, but I also think I would have loved to dress up in one of those costumes from the House of Worth from the 1860s, 1870s, and attended a ball in England, because I love the concept of like the very poofy short little skirt that would have been for that period, like showing your ankles was a big deal. Like, it wasn't something you did with everyday clothing or with everyday evening wear. And so even just that concept of being able to like really go out on a limb and do something different and wear one of these gorgeous costumes made by Worth. So yeah, so if I could get away with wearing an 1860s House of Worth costume at the Vanderbilt's ball in 1883, that might be my perfect match. And since we're talking about non-realities here, that's what I'll answer.
Very good. One last question. Would you associate Halloween festivals where lots of people get dressed up as similar to a fancy dress ball? And I'm thinking more like along the types of like the Irvington Halloween Festival.
Yeah, I think the Halloween specific like costume party aspect is so interesting, and it's definitely like a whole bucket of things on its own, because of the fact that, so like when it comes to Halloween, there's inspiration and cultural cultural like influences coming in from so many different sides. So you've got like pagan rituals that are part of Halloween's history, and you've got these like fancy dress balls and this idea of dressing up coming in from another part, and you've got things like celebrations like All Saints Day or All Souls Day coming in from Catholic regions. You've got Dia de los Muertos coming in. So Halloween is such an interesting holiday in the first place because it has so many cultural influences coming from so many places that I don't like, it's not a direct ancestor of any, or not ancestor, the other one, why can't I think of the word, a direct descendant it's not a direct descendant from any one celebration. It's kind of this conglomeration of all. But I think in terms of like an opportunity, like I've been thinking about, I have a costume party this weekend and I have not been able to figure out what to go as. And so while I was doing this research, I was like, okay, maybe going as something that is totally like an abstract concept would be kind of fun and kind of interesting. And, you know, there's not really a lot of places you could do that. So like if I wanted to be influenced by costumes from fancy dress balls, this is really kind of my opportunity to do that. Like as a normal, regular, middle-class American citizen, Halloween costume parties are about the only time I get to dress up. So yeah, so it's very interesting because Halloween is such a melting pot of all different kinds of cultures. So it's hard to say that it's exactly from this, but it's definitely a place where you get closest to these kinds of parties still.
Okay, well, thank you so much. With that, I'm going to invite John to come back on.
Hey, so that was just wonderful. And the whole time I'm looking at these outfits, I'm thinking about like not just like my past costumes, but also comparing them to like the Electric Light and also just some of the really cool ones. I love the Hornet, which was just because, you know, I think it's stylish, but also just like truly imaginative. But thank you both for being here tonight, and thank you, audience, for joining us. And if you like this program, I hope you come back next month. Our next History Happy Hour is on November 17th with a look at Hoosier Latinos, an upcoming book detailing the lives and contributions Latinos have had on the state of Indiana, with the authors Nicole Martinez-Legrand and Daniel Gonzalez. And then on December 8th, we will take a look at America's Store, the history of Ellis Ayres, with Ken Turchi, author of Ellis Ayres and Company, The Store at the Crossroads of America. You can sign up for these in person and our virtual events at www.indianahistory.org/visit/calendar. We'll post this conversation to the IHS YouTube channel and our website in the upcoming weeks. In the meantime, if you'd like to revisit any of our previous free programs, you can check out the History Happy Hour playlist on YouTube or at the link in the chat. If you missed your chance to donate or would like to make a further gift to support the Indiana Historical Society, please consider visiting indianahistory.org/contribute/donate. Your donation will allow us to continue to share Hoosier stories. You'll be prompted at the close of the webinar to take a 1-minute survey. We'd love to know what you thought and what topics you may be interested in learning more about. Again, Karen and Marissa, thank you for joining us tonight. I hope you all have a pleasant evening, and I look forward to seeing you in the future.
Yeah. Thank you so much.
Thank you.